discussions. Our guest today is Professor Anh Ngo. Anh is a professor of social work on our Brantford campus. Welcome, Anh.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you for having me.
So, Anh, maybe we could start off by telling us a bit about your background. How did you come to be working at Laurier?
Yeah, it's a funny story because when I tell the story, I tell people that I feel like I just went in one big circle. So I grew up in Brantford.
Right. Wow, I didn't know that.
Since the age of 2, my family came from Vietnam, and from the end of the war in Vietnam, and they found the first safe place they could get to, and we've been here since.
Wow.
And I went in one big circle. I went to Waterloo, the University of Waterloo, but I went to Gotcha. My practice, and when the opportunity to come back, Laurier has consistently, since even when I was a student, right, has consistently maintained a strong reputation. But not only that, but has always had the reputation of being well liked, which I think is very important, right? So when the opportunity came when the position opened up here in Brantford, I had to go for it.
So you must have been living in Brantford when Laurier began its campus there, right?
Yes, the first few years, and then I left.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so Brantford is so unique, and but I think I see, and my parents, my family agree, like Laurier has done quite a bit in terms of supporting this community towards where they were, where they'd like to go, where they were already moving, right, walking alongside the community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, excellent. Well, Anh, maybe we could start by having you describe your area of research. Like, what are some of the research questions that you're interested in as a scholar?
Yeah, and so when I talk about my research, I have to talk about my social work practice, right? Because within social work, all of our research is expected, and I think it's driven by the researchers themselves, right, to always be consistently grounded in our practice experiences, in our work with communities, right? There has to be a social justice component to it. So my research it's really informed by my practice when I was in Toronto working with racialized migrant communities. I worked with them in the areas of mental health and settlement and well-being. And it was really from that practice experience where I was deeply conscious of the limited representation of people like me within scholarship, right? As the scholar, there's plenty of research on people like me as research subjects, and I was very conscious of the limitations of the available research, what we knew at the time, and its impact on the community, and on our ability to practice and to support this community. And I think from there, I wanted to pursue higher education, going to do my doctorate in social work. But I've always been interested in the well-being of peoples and communities. And I think no matter where my research goes or what types of projects I'm working on, it's always back to that well-being of peoples and communities. From the point of how societal, structural, and systemic conditions limit and enables people's ability to achieve their well-being.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit different, right? That's a little bit different from like looking at it from like a practice perspective or like a counseling perspective. So I'm interested in those structures and systems. But from that from that fundamental focus of the conditions that structures and limits or enables, I kind of honed in on the area of knowledge production. So how people are able to achieve their well-being within the limits of societal knowledge that's produced about people. What are the dominant discourses about people? What are the meta-narratives about people, right? I wanted to produce research that utilizes the voices or lifts up the voices of the people to counter these dominant discourses or narratives.
Can you give us maybe a concrete example of what you mean by that last bit that you were talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So an example from my research. So my, for example, my doctoral research was looking at the narratives of refugee people.
Okay.
So what do we know of refugee people? We, based on, the literature, right? So from my research, refugee people they're deserving, right? Even when we're advocating for them, we're relying on these dominant narratives, right? They're deserving, which is why we should help them. Not because it's a human right, not because, Canada signed on to this international agreement, but they're deserving. They're helpless, they're deserving, they're grateful. They are also productive, and that's my community in particular, right? As Asian refugees, we're very productive, and the scholarship that came out about us, from a place of very, well-intentioned benevolence, right? Study after study showing that, they just came here in the 70s, and within 10 years, they've been able to, achieve all of this. So they're very productive. But then what happens to the people who don't fit into this narrative, right?
Right.
Yeah, and the harm that comes from that, as people rely on these narratives to know each other and also to know themselves. So that's kind of what I mean by, meta narratives and, dominant discourses.
I think that's helpful to make it
Yeah.
more accessible to us. So what inspires your research, and where do you get your ideas about what you want to spend the next several years working on?
Yeah. So again, just very much grounded in the community, right? These research areas, they might feel a little bit theoretical, right? Especially in social, we're a very practice-based profession, right? But like other projects that I work with, like I'm working on this PEG grant with Vietnamese seniors on them to, lift up their voices, to narrate their challenges in achieving culturally appropriate living conditions in Canada, right? It's very advocacy based. So, the research actually came from the community. They were reaching out, they were looking for scholars to kind of, help them access research, right? Research as a tool for advocacy. And other things that, other ways that I kind of, I guess, you asked getting ideas from or inspiration from is I'm part of, research networks, right? And we talk about this, we talk about ideas that excite us.
Yeah.
I love doing research in community, right? Like in communities of scholars. And I often reflect on, Laurier has been an amazing institutional home for me, right? It's allowed me to come back to my parents, to care for them as they're aging now. But I had to find an academic home, like an academic home being, a research group, a research network, maybe of, because even within social work, like dominant discourses, knowledge production, that's not something that maybe my peers or my colleagues, some of them might be working on, right?
Right.
I was able to find, to kind of be part of some academic homes, one being the Critical Refugee and Migration Studies Network in Canada. So
where are they based? All over.
Yeah. So there's scholars. We're emerging about the past 5 years now. There's scholars from, Laurier, Mac, U of T, etc. Very interdisciplinary. Some out in UBC. Scholars from history, English, political science, but women's studies, but are just interested in, refugee issues and migrant issues, right? As related to knowledge production and state structures.
Right.
So through these, through these conversations, through annual workshops, attending conferences, right? Just hearing about all of the different things that people are working on, and then kind of seeing where my interests might lie, right? Where some of the gaps are, some of the things that are exciting. And I have to admit, right? I don't want to out myself as a grant chaser, but sometimes when opportunities come up,
yep. No, you got
when they come up,
side of being an academic, right? On the Partnership Engage grant that you were talking about, is your community partner, are they based in Brantford, or where are they based?
No, they are based in Toronto.
Right. Okay. I was just thinking that that seems like a fairly specific group of people to be based in Brantford. So, okay.
Although, right, I am interested in learning a bit more about the racialized migrant community in Brantford.
Right.
We assume that, racialized migrants are concentrated in the cores, which they are, right? Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. They are, but what about the experiences of people in smaller communities, right? Do their experiences kind of speak to the experiences of what we know of people out in the urban centers?
Right.
I would love to, get together with, my dad still goes and meets up with his Vietnamese friends, they're all seniors at this point now, right? They go to a Tim Hortons coffee shop. And I would just love to sit there one day and just be like, hi, what are you talking about, right? Can I learn about your experiences?
I wonder what the Research Ethics Board considerations are for including your parents as study subjects.
Yeah, well, ask Courtney.
That's right, exactly. And you've talked about a number of threads of your research and areas of your research interest. Is there sort of like one large umbrella question that all these things are driving to answer, or are they kind of standalone pieces and you finish it and move on to the next kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't realize it at the time, or I'm starting to become aware of it now, right? Like I still kind of identify as an early career researcher, but I'm starting to kind of see the connection where I think really what the broad area that I'm working towards, right? Or my projects are working towards is really looking at relationality, like solidarity, allyship, right? Mm-hmm. And I started that, like the doctoral research was looking specifically at the Vietnamese Canadian community and how, dominant discourses around, our identity kind of perpetuated divisions within the community based on the lines of the war in Vietnam. Right? It was a civil war. There were two sides. But now these two sides are here in Canada and they're trying to, they need to exist, right? Coexist. But I'm really looking at solidarity and alliance building and looking at how, and thinking if we can challenge or interrogate, right, the meta narratives that structure us, that separate us, if we can disrupt this, right, how can we work towards better relations with one another so that we can address like the other massive issues that are impacting our communities, right? Poverty, aging generations. And I have a connections grant that's coming up that I hopefully, fingers crossed, can hold in person in the spring. And that looks at relationality from racialized migrants' perspective, right? How racialized migrants can build better relations with Indigenous peoples and communities, on Turtle Island here in Canada, right? And we're hoping to do that by looking at the technologies and operations of imperialism within Canada that kind of maintains, these divisions, these silos and fractures that keep us separated, right? I talk about Brantford. My family was sponsored here. And the story of sponsorship of refugee people, it's a white Canadian story, right? It's Howard Edelman with Operation Lifeline. It's Anglican churches, it's Mennonite communities. But I would love to know, like Six Nations is 10 kilometers away from Laurier, Bradford, right? During that time, the 70s and 80s, what were some of the contributions of other communities to this resettlement effort, to having people like me, right, here, and that's a story that hasn't been told yet, and I would love to have that story told. Right?
And so on a number of, well, I think I hate to label other people's work because the risk of getting it wrong, but I from the outside I would describe the kind of work that you do as community-based research. I don't know if you would accept that term, but I understand that one of the things that makes that kind of research difficult is how you build a relationship and trust between yourself and the community that you're going to be working with. in your experiences, has that been a major challenge? Have you struggled to do that? Do you have any reflections on that challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. And no, you're right. It is community-based research, right?
Okay. Don't want to get it wrong, but
Oh no. And I wouldn't do research in isolation, right? It's my research is always with community. And you know what? What we think of challenges or what we know of challenges in community-based research is only be a challenge within the structures that we have as an institution, as as an academic, scholarship, right? This whole I don't know, this technology that we're in. It's a challenge because there's deadlines. So building community takes time, right? These relationships, the people I'm working with, the Vietnamese seniors, they've known me since for like 15 years now when I was a social worker.
right.
And the sad thing is that working with seniors is not even in my field. It's not my field of practice. It's not my field of research. But this research study, this group really desperately needed some sort of advocacy, right? At this time, they were, lobbying for long-term care beds, and they succeeded. They're building a campus of care in Brampton right now.
Oh, nice.
But this research project, through an email chain, got bounced around, looking for someone interested in working with them, and it landed on my desk. I think, a couple years ago, right? And I was like, I know these people. That's that community building, right? Exactly as you identified, building those relationships of trust, so that you can work with the community, but the community trusts you to, work with them in ways that promote their interest of the community. So yeah, the challenges are, that time that it takes. Right now, out of that PEG grant, it's not even part of the grant, but this group of seniors, they needed they wanted some help with social media and creating infographics, translating knowledge in such a way that's accessible, right? Wasn't part of the grant, but here we are. So we're doing a little bit of that, right? That's a little bit of side project. So yeah, it's only a challenge within the structures that we have as academics.
Right. Okay. Well, that's very interesting perspective. I hadn't actually heard it phrased in that way before. But sticking on the theme of kind of how you do your research, as we talked about the challenges of working with communities, is your work collaborative, or is it largely just you as a lone scholar working away, with your community and your study subjects, et cetera, or do you mentioned a network earlier, so I mean, like all academics, you must speak to other people, but do you collaborate on research projects and grants and so forth? And if you do, then who are some of your closest colleagues? Where are they?
Yeah. So it's, I think coming out of the doctoral, right? Because, you do your doctoral pretty much by yourself. So I think I'm starting to build up, these formal collaborations with my colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
One thing about community-based research, though, right, is you also want to develop that level of trust with your colleagues.
Right.
So you can expose your community to them, right? Because we all know of scholarship or research that's not so much our cup of tea. But yeah, I'm starting to develop collaboration. So within it might have started with within my program and my department, some collaborations with my peers who I completed the doctoral with. So one colleague who is working on indigenous refugee relationality, based out of community with a community partner, right? And I'd say that area of research is really her area of research, and she's bringing that into this collaboration that we are developing as we pursue a SURE grant that's due in the next coming days, right? So yeah, collaborations are starting within the discipline, but then also the critical refugee and migration studies network, very interdisciplinary. And there's the Connections grant that I mentioned. It's called Other Empires, our 2-day symposium. just to give it a plug. That is
We'll be happy to push that out on social media for you. Just tell us when.
Thank you. But that's in collaboration with a senior scholar from Concordia in women's studies, and with another scholar at Renison in English, and a third scholar at U Montreal in social work.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
The network that you've mentioned a couple of times now, is that a formal network, or it's just kind of, just the name you refer to as your group of colleagues across the country?
Yeah, it is a formal network.
Okay.
It doesn't have an institutional base yet.
Right.
And I think we're working towards that as various members of the network start to go after funding for it, right? But so far, that network has produced an edited collection called States of Refuge. Mm-hmm. And we hold annual symposiums and annual workshops based out of various institutions. So this coming summer, they will be coming to Laurier.
Oh, great. That's great. I was going to say we should carry on this conversation at some point and talk about whether Laurier would be a good institutional home for that network. That's a conversation for another time, but it kind of fits our character and our mission and our values as an institution. So I can see lots of natural connections with them. But anyway, we'll have that conversation. So on what would you describe as, your proudest moment or one of your proudest moments as a scholar?
This is such a hard question,
John. I know. I feel bad asking it. I always think to myself, how would I answer that question?
Yeah, I can't, and I really tried thinking about this question, and I can't point to, just one proudest moment, right? Because I think for my academic career, it's, to speak plainly, right? I am like the textbook sandwich generation. I've got two little ones. I started my job when my youngest is 6 months old, right? He's a little monster now because I feel that guilt. Right? You carry that guilt with you. And then I have the aging parents. But I think my career is made up of many little moments that make me proud, or that make me feel like, okay, I think I'm on the right track. I think I'm here where I'm supposed to be. And it's like, seeing the impact in students, for example, right? Like Laurier Brantford has this wonderful research apprenticeship program, mm-hmm. where, undergraduate students can pursue their research of their choosing, right, as supported by a professor. So students, last year I taught them over remote. You don't really see many students, but then the students that you don't even think that you made an impact on are the ones coming back and saying, hey, can you supervise my project? One of them is doing content analysis of anti-racism on social media. Like, isn't that amazing? On TikTok, I don't even know what TikTok is, but they're doing that, right? They're doing that analysis.
Rich field too to be studying. There's a lot of material there.
Well, yeah. So establishing parameters is definitely something we talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Getting grants. Being able to use those grants in community to be able to actually see resources. The ivory tower, right, very traditionally has been inaccessible to, many communities, racialized migrant communities. But to be able to see myself as kind of being that conduit, to be able to get that out there has been really rewarding. And then meeting people, one of my academic idol was someone who sat in my job talk, and I just thought, oh my gosh, I get to work with you. At ACES last year, Jonathan, you spoke about your research trajectory, right? And it's good to hear all of these amazing things that people are working on, and you actually get to work with people. Like, it's just been incredible. Yeah.
I'm curious if your experience of meeting your research idols were similar to mine and some of my colleagues. We've had this discussion before that, people that you read all their work, particularly as a graduate student, when you're really immersed in the literature, and it's the first time you're really immersed in that way, and you read, the seminal works in your field, and then you meet that person at a conference or they come to give a talk or whatever, and you go, oh my God, they're way younger than I thought they were going to be. I always assume they're going to be old. I actually realized I said to my postdoc supervisor, and he came for a visit to Canada not long after I had moved to Canada, and we were talking, and I said, I realize now that I'm older than you were when you were my supervisor, and I just assumed he was going to be this ancient guy. Anyway, sorry, I don't need to take up that.
No. I was just gonna make a joke. Maybe yeah. No, it's been incredible to be able to meet your academic, idols, right? And they're always, I don't know, maybe your experience might have been different than mine, but thankfully, mine have always been nicer than I thought. For someone of that brilliance.
I would say that too. Yeah, they're more approachable than you think they're going to be.
Absolutely, and then to be able to work with them. But I do have to admit, so my academic idol at Laurier, right, Martha Kwe Kumsa, who just recently retired, is now working with me on a project. So it's kind of navigating that identity of student and mentee to now kind of partner, right? And it's not easy.
That is a strange transition, isn't it?
It is. But it's been incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're getting down to the end of our time together. I wonder if you want to just reflect on work that you're really that you're doing right now. Like what have you just finished up or just finishing up now, and what's been kind of interesting or surprising about the results of that work?
Yeah. Let's see. I'm not sure if I can speak to that about, like, for example, work that I've just finished up, but things that I'm interested in learning more, maybe pursuing. So for one thing, like the work that for example, for my doctoral research, right, one of the things that came out of that was Cold War epistemology, right, which is really new to me. And I think it's still not quite out in doesn't have quite a high profile yet. But Cold War epistemology is really, tracing, the Cold War not as an event or a series of events, but also as a knowledge producer, right? So how does the ideas, the discourses, informed by events, obviously, but how does that whole era, right, continue to have legacies to shape how we know one another, to shape our sentiments? And this is really coming from, the research with the Vietnamese community, where there still is that, that regional rivalry between Vietnam and China, right? But how does that continue to be maintained and perpetuated? The events of the elections in the States, last year was the year before, right? How different racialized groups were voting in very different ways because of some of the sentiments from the Cold War was effectively mobilized and manipulated. So how does that continue to live as an enduring legacy and live through? So that's something I'd like to go back to, as I'm working through some of the projects I have now.
That's growing out of your dissertation work. You were working on something like that wow, that's interesting. We could have a half an hour discussion of just that, I'm sure. Actually, it's unfortunate I'm doing this today from my office in Waterloo. Usually I often do this from my home office, where if you've ever noticed over my left shoulder is a sign from the Cold War that they were all over the US. There were fallout shelters, and all public buildings had them. Yeah. Well, really, I'm afraid this is all for us this week. I hope the audience will all join me in thanking our guest. Thank you so much for sharing your scholarly passions with us today.